Hey everybody, Hofstad's Tortoise here and welcome to the first video in my historical video series. Today we're going to be talking about a small period in Russian history, and this spans from about 1850 to 1895. In this video we're going to be talking about Alexander II, Alexander III, the emancipation of the serfs, and a terrorist organization known as the People's Will. I hope this period of history is as fascinating for you as it is for me, so strap yourselves in and let's enjoy the ride. Serfdom was the most common social institution in Europe for most of the Middle Ages. England abolished serfdom in 1574, France in 1789, and other Eastern European countries also lost it before the mid-19th century. However, Russia continued this practice until 1861. In serfdom, a community lived on the land of a nobleman and were obligated to work in the fields and pay taxes. In this context, a peasant was barely better off than an American slave. Rarely did serfs escape the system, and their families were forced to continue this form of slavery for many generations. The people working the fields, called serfs, were generally bound to the nobleman until their death. Serfdom was essentially the largest method of living for anybody in Europe that was poor. In Russia, approximately 4/5 of the population lived under this status at any point in time. The Russian serf was the most miserable of the Russian people. They lived and died under the rule of the dvoranya, or the nobility. For the nobility, this was the best way to continue living a lavish lifestyle without having to give two shits towards the health and well-being of their subjects. Feudalism and serfdom was always a large aspect of the Russian social institution, but from 1649, when the Sobornoye Ulozhenie, or Code of Law, was enacted, the serfs were owned by the nobility. A serf lost all their rights. They could not run, marry, vote, or do anything that was not approved by the dvoranya, and any deviation from this Code of Law was met incredibly harshly. A serf could be bought and sold at will, and anybody that knows the plays of Chekhov and the works of Gogol knows exactly how much the life of a serf was worth. The latter author made this well known in Dead Souls, as manorial estates tended to measure their worth in dushi, or souls, which was made up of the number of male serfs that lived on the noble's land. As a result, serfs were bored, unruly, and often their lives meant little. Every other day this frustration manifested itself as small villages rebelling against the dvoranya, but were quickly quashed by the military. To quote a section from 3/6 Sisters, a play by Chekhov, "This town's been in existence for 200 years. 100,000 people live in it, but there's not one who's any different from all the others. There's never been a scholar, or an artist, or a saint in this place. Never a single man sufficiently outstanding to make you feel passionately that you wanted to emulate him. People here do nothing but eat, drink, and sleep. Then they die and some more people take their place, and they eat, drink, and sleep as well. And just to introduce a bit of variety into their lives, so as to avoid getting completely stupid with boredom, they indulge in their disgusting gossip and vodka and gambling and lawsuits." This quote embodies the limitation of the typical serf, and how the temptation of Tsarism was to blame for all of this. Now, Tsarism is basically the Russian version of a monarchy with extra insanity. In a typical European monarchy, a king or a queen was often checked by a legislative body or group of nobles that could veto laws that were deemed particularly batshit fucked up. But not in Russia. Tsarism, or absolute monarchism, meant that all power was focused on the Tsar, and legislation had to be commissioned from the Tsar himself. The problem with this is that a lazy or meek ruler can get intimidated and have everybody else do the work for him, while he just focuses on unimportant shit like budget repairs or agricultural schools, or how many buttons the old guard wore in their fucking uniforms. Isn't that right, Nicholas? One of the largest problems in Tsarism, next to the aforementioned batshit insanity, is the large amount of supporters that these reigns actually had. Many conservative journalists in the cities loved the autocracy. Even Dostoevsky was a fan of it. A subset of these people were also strictly orthodox and hated modernization. These people were called the Slavophiles. The Slavophiles thought that European democracy was morally bankrupt and contributed to a corrupt nation that was not united under someone appointed by God. Obviously, the Slavophiles were a major proponent of serfdom, as they believed that the modernity would corrupt the morally pure farming communities. After the reigning Tsar died of pneumonia, Alexander II ascended to the throne in the middle of the Crimean War, a religious war where the Russians were pitted against a coalition consisting of the French, British, Ottomans, and Sardinians. After the fall of Sevastopol and a crushing defeat for the Russians, Alexander recognized a need for reform, which classes him as possibly the most liberal Russian Tsars in history, just for recognizing the whole fucking issue. The war was costly for Russia, and many advisors as well recognized the need for military and social reforms, as the country could no longer compete with industrialized Britain and France. The first of these was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861. Essentially, the failure of the Crimean War was the catalyst that allowed the Tsar to introduce the reforms without much resistance, as Russia's status as a power took a major hit and something needed to be done. This was because serfdom produced inept and apathetic soldiers and were pretty much blamed for the war. Over a period of 5 years, the commission put together a series of proposals and the final copy was presented to the Tsar. This was called the Krestyanskaya Reforma, or the Reform of the Peasants. The serfs were finally freed. They could own property, marry at will, buy land, trade, and vote, and this was only the beginning of Alexander's work. In the military, he enacted universal conscription and extended the process to the upper class and made officer training mandatory. For the press and the universities, he gave more freedoms and let them work in a more autonomous fashion. He also remade the judicial system from the ground up, introducing trial by jury and party equality. He also introduced the Zemstva, and this was a new system of government that was meant to increase efficiency in the lower areas, mainly just above the village level. This was because there was very little communication between village level administration and the Tsar, and this basically increased the efficiency of tax collection and basically all the little bureaucratic bullshit that happened. You'd think with all these reforms, people would be quite happy, but this was very, very far from the case, and this is what this next section is all about. Although the emancipation of the serfs gave them freedom in writing, there were issues in actually attaining this freedom in practicality, as there were several processes involved that caused the serfs to become massively in debt to the state, and kind of fucked them over in a massive way. The first thing was that although the serfs gained ownership of the land that was leased to them to do their crops, the land was pretty much guaranteed to be a giant piece of shit, and it was sold at a price that was about a third over the expected market price, making it a very expensive giant piece of shit. What was even worse is that the serfs were expected to pay it back in 49 years, and these payments were called redemption payments, and more often than not the serfs simply sold back the land so they wouldn't have to go through the bullshit hardship that came along with these payments. And this doesn't even take into account the months it took for the upper class to take stock of the land value into account, and that's basically them trying to optimize how to screw the serfs for maximum profit. It's sort of like giving a poor kid an ice cream cone and telling the kid that he owes you money. Hey poor people, we are actually going to give you the land that you work on.
Boże moi, that's amazing! Glory to the Tsar!
Yes, but now you owe me your entire livelihood for 49 years.
Blyet!
To get an idea of how fucked off the people were, there were about 400 riots in the first few months of the emancipation, and one of these riots caused 70 deaths. Now pretty much all of this is based on basic serfs that are privately owned. State serfs are a different matter and were emancipated a few years later, but they didn't get bug-fucked quite as badly because they got a better choice of land. The nobles were pretty pissed as well, as their revenue was decreased significantly and they couldn't maintain their lifestyles. To counteract this, they put a passage tax on land, and any serf that wants to pass through this land would have to pay that tax. It's pretty easy to tell that this whole program was completely balked from the very beginning. The serfs hated it because they were stuck having to pay for crappy land, as the consequences for moving were too great due to economic penalties. The nobility hated it as they lost money from not having any slaves, and the Slavophiles hated it because they fucking love to dominate the poor people. And all of this paved towards the last section of the video, the Narodnaya Volya. Now let's go to 1874 to the birth of the Narodniks. The Narodniks were an interesting breed of edgelord. Think of your 13-year-old Tumblr child that tries to get other people into communism by screaming in their face, failing miserably, and then going back to the dark corner of the internet mumbling about Marxism. Essentially, they were precursor communist pseudo-intellectuals that thought there was too much of a disparity between serfs that got lucky enough to become wealthy, designated as kulaks, and the lower class, and they wanted to exploit this disparity to overthrow the monarchy, as they saw the lower peasants as the revolutionary class. So they had a movement called the Khozhenie v Narod, or going to the people, where they got off their ass from their social positions and shoved communist propaganda in the face of the peasants. Naturally, the peasants went, "Who the fuck are you?" And the Narodniks were imprisoned or punted out of the village. From this movement came the Narodnaya Volya, or the People's Will, a terrorist party that actually sort of got shit done. They basically thought that instead of acting like train station activists to get the lower class to care, they would blow shit up instead. Eventually, a group later called the Povomatovsky managed to assassinate the Tsar in 1881. It was organized by the chairman of the People's Will, Andrei Zhelyabov, and Ignacy Polishnaim. Ignacy Polishnaim managed to throw a bomb at the Tsar and nearly shredded him in half. Although they managed to kill off the Tsar, they were all caught and executed. But here is where it gets kind of balked. The peasants didn't give a shit. Nothing really happened except a new Tsar. Alexander II's son, Alexander III, ascended the throne and reversed a heap of the reforms his father made. The worst of these was weakening the Zemstva for more power and instituting land captains instead, who were basically psychotic fucking cops that all the peasants feared. Alex III also screwed over the universities by removing autonomous hiring of teachers. He also used the Orthodox Church to try and teach a cult-like obedience for the peasantry. So let's recap what happened. The People's Will, in an attempt to get a more liberal government, killed the Tsar, failed to start a revolution, and only managed to get in a Tsar that removed liberties from just about everyone. Nice fucking work. So anyway guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this content. This was basically a test video for my series, and I know that the tone of this video sort of went all over the fucking place. At first it was super serious, then I turned into a meme lord fuck. Let me know which bits of it you liked best, if there was any mistakes, or it's probably mistakes all over the fucking place. But I know a lot more about Napoleon than this area. So if you enjoyed this content, please let me know what else you'd like me to talk about, what else I should improve on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, subscribe, all that crap, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you for watching.